Do we want to talk about Cubism at all, or is that?
Sure, yeah. What do you have to say about it?
And full disclosure, with me being like a week into Picasso research and stealing stuff from BBC documentaries, but yeah, I mean, people credit this one painting in particular, Le Demoiselles
Yes,
d'Avignon,
of
which
course.
the young ladies of Avignon,
Yeah.
originally titled the Brothel of Avignon. So this is often credited as the first Cubist painting, or the painting that showed what was to be. And so Picasso, up till that point, like many people, had been, well, he'd been classically trained. There's the misconception, maybe from some people, that Picasso like had not mastered the kind of more realistic painting, but he absolutely had as a very young man.
Yes, and you can I mean the paintings from those earlier periods are proof of that.
Right.
It's like Velázquez, who was his master in a way. One
So
of them, right?
right, so there was some experimentation going on in terms of like the French Impressionists. People, there's no doubt that art had the capacity to change and is always changing. But this was just considered such a, I mean, the shift to more cubist representations of people, for example, or objects, was like a sea change, like art world had never experienced, and to the point where this particular painting wasn't publicly displayed until like 6 years after it was actually painted, because of maybe backlash and maybe his own reticence. But yeah, so it's interesting. First of all, just the movement as itself, as a movement of just a different way of looking at objects, and some people say that Cubism is a direct response to photography is growing prominence, because painters were saying, well, you guys, the photograph can has clearly found a way to master realism. So kind of what's our duty now as a painter? What role can we fulfill? Well, we can do this, and you can't. We can show something in this really bizarre way, and that kind of gives agency back to the artist and gives power back to the artist.
That
So
reminds me
that's
of some of
interesting.
the issues we discussed in episode 2, the holy moment, and like Thomas Bernhard's uh, critiques of photography and film
Uh-huh.
as being not uh, reproductions of reality, but distortions thereof. But we don't need to rehash that. Uh, what else?
Yeah, I mean, I guess just, do you have a visceral or more considered reaction or relationship to Cubism?
Well, I think we
Do
touched
you like
upon.
it?
I touched upon. I think we touched upon that earlier. It's a distortion and a fragmenting of reality. I do like it. Yeah, I mean, of course, I think it was a necessary stage, and
But
Picasso
it's
was
aesthetically quite satisfying. That's what I want to say.
well.
Right? Like some modern art movements maybe just don't necessarily give us much like carnal satisfaction. But I
Well, it
think like a
depends. It
painting
depends on
like
what we're
this
talking
does.
about. I mean, not
Sure.
every Cubist painting is a masterpiece, and I was just going to say, like, Picasso is not responsible for this development on his own. There was also Braque, right? We have to
Right.
give him some credit.
Sure.
Although maybe he was, I don't know, it's hard to say. But maybe Braque's work is less interesting, more formalistic, whereas Picasso is using Cubism as just one uh, tool in his toolbox. It's like it wasn't like an ideological commitment he had to pictorial representation. It's just like, okay, I'll try this. You know what I mean? Whereas Brock was more like, I'm Mr. Cubism.
Mm. And I also feel like I don't want to give Picasso too much credit either. Like the idea that that painting that we mentioned, the Young Ladies of Avignon, like that is the birth of modern art. That seems a bit over the
Oh,
top as
I
well.
think so too. And
Yeah. So
as many people have pointed out, the influence of African art cannot be discounted either. It's not purely an example of cubism, right? They're cubist elements, but like the faces are based on African masks that he had seen
sure,
in the museum.
sure.
So there's kind of a
Yeah.
what they called a primitivism, and there was that movement of the uh, the so-called wild beasts. I don't know if that was before or after, but there was like an interest in the primitive, so-called primitive,
Right.
which
Right.
is
I think
you know
Cezanne is was highly influenced by that, if I'm not mistaken.
okay. Well, I applaud all of that. I'm in favor of all that, and Cubism as well. And Cubism influenced the Dadaists, like one of the early Dadaist cabarets featured what they called cubist dances. Just imagine people like trying to dance in a cubist manner. What would that look like?